Hello, my name is Philip Conway and I'm the parish priest of the Lifton Benefice in West Devon. The last 3 weeks or so have made all our churches think about how we do things. We can no longer meet together for worship, we can no longer greet each other, and we can no longer meet together to learn. So I thought that over this time of quarantine and lockdown, I would give us the opportunity to do some learning together. And to begin with, I thought I'd begin at perhaps the most obvious place to begin when we are on our own, and that is something that we can do on our own, and that is reading the Bible. Reading the Bible is, of course, an important endeavour for Christians. It's something that we are expected to do. It's something that we hear read publicly in church regularly, and some of us may read it publicly. But how many of us actually sit down and read the scriptures at home? The problem is, of course, is that reading the scriptures is not an easy thing to do. Reading the Bible can sometimes be very hard. And it is not something that should ever be done without the use of the brain, without intelligent thought. So, today I'd like to begin by making some suggestions as how we can prepare to read the Bible in a way that helps us grow in love for God through it. Well, the first thing I'd like to say is that in the true sense of the word, the Bible is not a book. Yes, of course, it is a book in one sense. We can buy it in bookshops. We can get a copy of it in the library, and there are more than 2 or 3 copies on my bookshelves. But it is not a book in that sense. One of the things I always used to say to children when thinking of what the Bible was is to remember what the French word is for library. A bibliothèque. A collection. And the Bible is precisely that. It is a collection of books. And when we think of a collection of books, we need to be careful again. And so this morning, before I started this session, I went round the bookshelves of our own home here and got a rough collection of books randomly from the shelves. So the first thing I have here is a thriller by Lee Child about Jack Reacher. It's a bit of fiction. It's what I call my holiday reading. I've got here the magazine of the Wildfowl and Wetlands Trust. An interesting magazine about nature with some good articles, adverts and so forth. I've got here a book about Agent Zigzag, a book about World War II espionage. Fascinating. Bit of history. I've got here from my wife's shelves a copy of Anne of Green Gables, a great favourite of many. A piece of fiction. I've got here Mary Berry's Complete Cookbook. What would I do without it? Fantastic. A book of instructions. And then here I've got The Tale of Tom Kitten, a Beatrix Potter, what you might call a fairy story, written for children. And then, because there's plenty of them in our house, I've picked up a couple of scores of music. The ones that came to hand were Handel's Messiah and the St Matthew Passion by Bach. So words and music. And then, finally, here's a letter from some friends of ours. Not a book in that sense, but nonetheless some reading material for communication. And I could have added lots to it. I could have added a book of poetry, or an instruction manual about how to mend the car. Not that I would ever do that myself. It wouldn't be safe. But any genre of literature that I could have on these shelves, I could have put in that pile. And that's what the Bible is. The Bible is a collection of books of all kinds of genres that have been bound in the same volume. But just to make things harder, with the exception of two that I can think of, all the things that I've shared with you have been published or written in the last 50, 60 years. And they were all written in English. But if you look in our shelves, you'll find books that have been published originally hundreds of years ago, and some of them were originally written in another language. Some of them have been translated from one language into another language and then into English. Now, if you add all that together with the different genres and the different understandings of nuances of language, that's what you have when you have the Bible. Now, the one thing that all those books or parts of the Bible have in common, of course, is that they are in some way about the relationship between God and his people. But everything in the Bible, whether it's a passage of quite fruity love poetry, to instructions on how to build a wall, to somebody's opinion on how good a king somebody was, to a letter admonishing people and saying that it's about time they got their act in order and behaved properly, to a story that was written in order to explain an important truth. They are all scripture. But the way we understand a poem is very different to the way we understand a letter. The way we understand instructions on how to build a wall is very different to the way we understand a story that's written to, on the one hand, entertain us, and on the other hand, to explain a divine truth. So the first thing we do when we are reading the scriptures is to ask that really important question: what am I actually reading? Not is it Bible or not, but am I reading a letter or a poem? Am I reading a list of instructions? Am I reading somebody's opinion? If so, where's that opinion coming from? What is it? It's the first of what theologians refer to as the exegetical questions, finding out what we are reading. That's the first question. What is it? So whatever version of the Bible you read, and we'll come to that later, whatever version of the Bible you read, that should be your first question. And you can do that sometimes by actually looking at the text, depending what version of the Bible you are reading. When you look at it, does it look as though it's a poem? Some Bibles write poems as poems, some just put them in lines the same as prose. What does the title of the book tell us? Are we reading an expression of faith in God or an angry rant to God about the way things have not worked out properly? How do we understand that? If I was to read Mary Berry's Cake Book and not fully understand what I was saying, what I was reading, and then was to pick up a fairy tale and read it without fully understanding and swap them round. So I read the recipe as if I was reading a fairy tale, and the fairy tale as I was reading a recipe. I would either have some very strange cakes or some very unpleasant nightmares. So the first thing when we are reading the scriptures is to ask that first question. What am I reading? And how does that help me understand it? And if you need any assistance with getting your mind round that, let me give you an example. There are two ways of explaining, let's say, the beauty of a daffodil. You could explain it in a very scientific manner. You could use precise measurements and a colour chart and texture details, and that would tell you about the daffodil. But equally, you could write a poem about it. And I would guess that William Wordsworth's beautiful poem about daffodils says far more to many people about what daffodils are and do, more than, say, a scientific description of one. Neither one is more correct than the other, and both are valuable. But we need to know what we are reading in order to fully understand the richness of what is in the text. So thank you very much for listening to my first introduction to reading the scriptures. I wish you well.